GGG have just officially announced that patch 0.5 for Path of Exile 2 will be revealed at the end of April. That would indicate that the reveal livestream will take place either on April 23rd or April 30th, with the league actually launching on May 1st at the earliest. But it's possible that it could launch on May 8th. Now, we already know that Path of Exile 1's upcoming 3.28 release will launch on March 6th, and 3 weeks ago we learned that GGG will be hosting Exilecon for the third time later this year, which indicates that big announcements are planned for that convention. The first ever Exilecon, back in 2019, is where they first announced Path of Exile 2, initially known as Path of Exile 4.0, as it was originally planned as a major update to the first game, which would introduce a second campaign amongst other features. Then, at the second Exilecon in 2023, it was revealed that Path of Exile 2 would be a standalone game, and we received an early access launch date for June the following year, which later had to be pushed back to December. So, what will the third installment of Exilecon have in store for us? Well, many have been suggesting the announcement of 1.0 for Path of Exile 2, a release that would see the game come out of early access and be officially recognised as a full release product, and one that would remove the paywall and turn it free to play. Now, I think that the announcement of Path of Exile 2 1.0 at Exilecon later this year is extremely likely. However, the big question is, when exactly will 1.0 launch? And that's what brings me to the topic of this video, because I can see two possible timelines for Path of Exile 1 and 2 for this year and beyond in terms of releases, and as of right now, I'm not really sure which one is more likely. You see, ever since GGG got back to regular releases for both games, they've been sticking to release dates rather than fixed content. If some features aren't ready in time and they don't make it into that release, they work on them in the background and roll them into the next league instead. The plan in this case then is to launch a new league every 4 months for each game, with staggered releases between the two games. Initially, this meant that there was approximately a 2-month gap between each release, inclusive of PoE 1 and PoE 2. This shift has allowed them to be more consistent, but the release dates haven't always fallen in the 4-month window. Let's take a look at Path of Exile 1 first. Patch 3.26, The Secrets of the Atlas, launched on June 13th, 2025. Then there was a 20-week gap before 3.27 was launched, that's the Keepers of the Flame League, on October 31st. And we already know that 3.28 will be launching on March 6th, 2026, which will be exactly 18 weeks after the previous update. Then, for Path of Exile 2, we can go back a little bit further, to the initial early access launch, which was on December 6th, 2024. Then, patch 0.2, Dawn of the Hunt, released 17 weeks later on April 4th, 2025. Then we waited a much longer 21 weeks until 0.3, The Rise of the Abyssal, came on August 29th. Then just 15 weeks later, 0.4, The Fate of the Vaal, launched just in time for Christmas on December 12th. And we now know that patch 0.5 will launch on May 1st, 2026 at the earliest, which would be 20 weeks following the date of 0.4. So the gap between league launches has been just over 18 weeks on average for Path of Exile 2 since the early access launch. And even though we have a lot less data for PoE 1 due to that massive gap between 3.25 and 3.26, the gaps between the leagues we've had and the one coming up were 20 weeks and 18 weeks. So it's a similar story for PoE 1 as well. Now, this all leads to the two possible timelines for Path of Exile 1 and 2 this year, because as I already mentioned before, the full release announcement for Path of Exile 2 1.0 is extremely likely for Exilecon in November. But when will 1.0 actually launch? Well, for 1.0 to be able to launch in the December 2026 window, which is presumably where they would ideally want to have it since that's the best slot for them financially, that would mean the latest realistic launch date of December 11th, because they have staff that are going to be leaving for Christmas break, and the 18th is just too late in the month to the point where they can't react to bugs and any issues that arise that must be addressed. and for Path of Exile 2 1.0 to launch on December 11th, 2026, that would mean that the gap between 0.5 and 0.6, and the one between 0.6 and 1.0, would need to be exactly 16 weeks each, or 32 weeks between the two combined. So firstly, I'll mention that I think this is absolutely possible, and I also think that this is the most likely of the two scenarios. Even if 16-week gaps for 2 releases in a row seems unlikely given what we've had in the past, the 1.0 release in December is simply a slot that they won't want to miss out on. And on top of that, we had a 17-week gap for 0.1 to 0.2, which included the Christmas break, and then a 15-week gap between 0.3 and 0.4, so we do know that it's possible. However, I do want to discuss another potential timeline. Now, ever since patch 3.26 for Path of Exile 1, we know that game director Mark Roberts has plans for the developing Atlas endgame with the continuation of the Zana story arc. Several years ago, Path of Exile 1 received routine Atlas expansions. These would occur every 4 leagues. We had one in patch 3.9 with Cirrus, then another in 3.13 with the Maven, and another in 3.17 with Eta and Exarch. And the most recent Atlas expansion kicks off a new Zana story arc in patch 3.26. Coincidentally then, the release that will be exactly 4 leagues following 3.26 will be the PoE 1 end-of-year update for 2026. Going back to those dates then, 3.29 is likely to launch at some point in July, which would mean that patch 3.30 should be launching in November or December 2026, depending on the gaps between 3.28 and 3.29, and then 3.29 and 3.30. And this is the other potential timeline, one that would see a Path of Exile 1 Atlas expansion take the end-of-year slot for 2026, with Path of Exile 2's 1.0 launch likely being announced for sometime in 2027 instead. Now, to be clear, I do think that this is the less likely scenario of the two, but I do believe that they want to deliver the Atlas expansion at some point around that time slot, and they probably also want to do a patch 4.0 for Path of Exile 1 at some point, and what better time to do it than immediately following a big announcement at Exilecon. But what are your thoughts on the timeline for Path of Exile 1 and 2? When is 1.0 for PoE 2 going to launch? Will it be in December this year, or will it be in 2027? Let me know your takes on this topic in the comments below. Thanks for watching this video, and as always, stay tuned and stay safe.